Some people spend their entire lives chasing fortune, digging through dirt, taking risks, and gambling everything on the hope of striking it rich. But for a few, luck arrived in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes as a shimmering speck in the riverbed, sometimes as a rumor shouted in the streets, and sometimes just a beep on a metal detector. These stories will take you through men who came close to greatness, men who lost everything, and the ones who stumbled into life-changing treasure. Let's start with those who weren't quite so lucky, and work our way toward the luckiest of them all. Number 7. James Marshall. In January of 1848, James W. Marshall was just a carpenter, finishing up work on a sawmill along the American River in California. It was supposed to be an ordinary job, but destiny had other plans. As Marshall leaned over the flowing water, something caught his eye, tiny flecks of light glinting in the riverbed. Curious, he scooped them up, and what he held in his hands would change history forever. Gold. Not just ordinary flakes, but some of the purest gold ever seen. Excited, Marshall shared his discovery with a few workers and the landowner. But instead of celebration, panic set in. By the very next morning, men began vanishing from the work site. The following day, even more disappeared. Within a week, Marshall was left alone. His crew had abandoned the sawmill to hunt for their own riches. Word spread fast, faster than wildfire. Within months, thousands of desperate men, some armed and dangerous, flooded the riverbanks. By the end of the year, over 4,000 strangers had invaded the land, all infected with what became known as gold fever. The California gold rush had begun. It was one of the deadliest and most chaotic chapters in American history, leaving behind ruined towns, broken men, and a trail of blood. And the man who started it all? James Marshall never struck gold again. After decades of searching, he died a poor man in 1885, penniless despite sparking a global frenzy. But what about the man who actually owned the land where this gold was found? His story is even more tragic. Number 6. John Sutter. John Sutter was a dreamer, a Swiss immigrant who had made his way to California. He was granted nearly 49,000 acres of land by the Mexican government in 1841. His goal? To build a self-sufficient settlement that would attract new immigrants from Europe, and for a while, it looked like he might succeed. He built farms, ranches, distilleries, even mills. His workers cultivated fields and raised livestock, and his dream of a thriving community seemed within reach. Then came James Marshall with his glittering discovery. When Marshall rushed to show Sutter the gold, the landowner's heart sank. He knew exactly what this meant. If word spread, his life's work would be destroyed. Sutter begged Marshall to keep it quiet, even as he rushed to buy up neighboring lands. But secrets never last long. Just days later, a San Francisco publisher named Samuel Brannan got wind of the discovery. He printed the news, shouted it in the streets, and before Sutter knew it, his land was swarming with squatters. They tore apart his fields, destroyed his crops, stole his livestock, and built makeshift camps across his property. Within months, Sutter's dream lay in ruins. For decades, he fought legal battles, suing the government for compensation. And finally, in 1880, he won. He was awarded $50,000, the equivalent of about $1.4 million today. But fate had one last cruel twist. Just 2 days later, John Sutter died. His son would go on to build a city on the ruins of his father's land, naming it Sacramento. John Sutter's dream did come true, but not for him. Sometimes fortune doesn't fall to the people who build the foundations. Sometimes it rewards complete outsiders. Number 5. George Carmack. It was the summer of 1896. George Carmack, a drifter with a reputation for being lazy, set out fishing along the Klondike River in the Yukon, Canada. With him were two Tagish men, Skookum Jim and Dawson Charlie. None of them could have imagined what they were about to stumble upon as they waded through the shallow waters. One of the men noticed something unusual glimmering among the rocks. At first, they thought it might just be fool's gold. But when Carmack bent down to inspect, his jaw dropped. These weren't just flecks. They were chunky nuggets, heavy and unmistakably real. The men wasted no time. They staked their claim, roping off the creek bed, and began panning. Every scoop of dirt seemed to yield more treasure. Within weeks, they had more gold than most men would see in a lifetime. News of their find exploded across the continent. Over the next 3 years, more than 100,000 men stormed into the Yukon, braving brutal cold, treacherous terrain and starvation, all for a chance at striking it rich. This became the Klondike Gold Rush. As for Carmack, he became fabulously wealthy. He could have retired in comfort, living out his life in luxury. But gold fever is a disease. Carmack was consumed by the need to find more. For the next 26 years, he traveled endlessly through California, Nevada, and Washington, staking claim after claim, chasing the high of that first discovery. But lightning never struck twice. In 1922, at the age of 61, George Carmack died while digging yet another claim, still chasing the fortune he had already secured. Obsession had robbed him of peace, but his discovery made him a legend. Number 4. Clarence Barry. Clarence Barry was the son of a failed gold prospector. His father had been one of the so-called 49ers who traveled to California chasing riches, but came back with nothing but disappointment. Clarence grew up poor, working long hours on fruit farms in Selma, California, barely making ends meet. By 1896, he was nearly 30 years old, broke, and desperate for a better life. That's when he heard whispers about gold in Alaska. He scraped together his savings, grabbed his wife and brother, and moved north to try his luck. At first, he worked as a bartender, barely surviving. But one night, a mysterious customer walked in, ordered beer, and paid with gold nuggets. Clarence's eyes widened. When he asked where it came from, the man casually replied, "The Klondike." That man was none other than George Carmack himself. Fueled by his father's stories, and now by this first-hand encounter, Barry gathered his family and set out for the Klondike. The journey was hell. They trudged through the treacherous Chilkoot Pass, a wall of ice where countless animals and men had already died. They carried a year's worth of supplies, dragging sleds, enduring blizzards, and nearly starving. When they finally reached Little Rabbit Creek, the land looked barren. They dug day after day, the frozen ground yielding nothing. Weeks passed, their supplies dwindled, hope slipping away. But then, at 30 feet deep, their shovels struck something incredible: gold. Buckets and buckets of it. Within weeks, the Barry brothers had collected what would be worth over $5 million today. They left the Klondike before the full rush began, their fortune secured. But here's where their story takes a different turn. Instead of wasting their riches, they invested wisely, founding the Barry Corporation, an oil company that still operates today. By the time Clarence died, he had not only lived the dream his father never achieved, but built a legacy that lasted generations. Not everyone was so smart. Some made fortunes not by digging for gold, but by selling the tools. Number 3. Samuel Brannan. Samuel Brannan may have been the most ingenious opportunist in California's history. At 14, he learned the printing trade, and by 27, he'd made his way to San Francisco. He opened the California Star, the city's first newspaper, and later, a general store near Sutter's fort. One day, whispers reached him that gold had been discovered nearby. Unlike most, Brannan didn't grab a pickaxe. Instead, he ran to every store in the area and bought up every pan, shovel, and pick he could find. He paid 20 cents each for pans, then resold them for $15, the equivalent of $600 today. But Brannan wasn't finished. He wanted to make sure demand for his supplies skyrocketed. He had a newspaper, after all. So he printed the news of the discovery and prepared to announce it. But before the paper could even hit the streets, his workers deserted, rushing off to hunt for gold. So Brannan took matters into his own hands. He ran through the streets of San Francisco, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Gold, gold, gold from the American River." With that, the California gold rush truly exploded. In just a few months, Brannan made over $36,000, more than $1.5 million today. Soon, he was pulling in $150,000 per month, the equivalent of $6 million. Without ever swinging a pickaxe, Samuel Brannan became California's first millionaire. It was proof that sometimes the real gold lies not in the ground, but in the tools you sell to the dreamers. But while Brannan's story was about shrewd business, others found fortune by sheer accident. Number 2. John Deeson and Richard Oats. By 1869, most miners in Victoria, Australia, had given up. The gold rush was long over, and the rivers had been stripped bare. But John Deeson and Richard Oats refused to quit. One afternoon, while scraping the soil in a spot called Bulldog Gully, Deason's pickaxe hit something unusually hard. Curious, he brushed away the dirt. What emerged was not a rock. It was metal. Gold. At first, they thought it might be a decent-sized nugget. But the more they dug, the more the golden mass revealed itself. It stretched 2 feet long and a foot deep. Their jaws dropped. They had uncovered the largest gold nugget ever found. It weighed a staggering 241 pounds, so heavy it had to be cut into 3 pieces just to be moved. The nugget, later named the Welcome Stranger, was sold for around 9,400 pounds, which would be over $6 million today. Their discovery was so monumental that the site is now marked with a stone monument, a reminder of one of the luckiest strikes in history. And yet, even that wasn't the luckiest find. Because our final story belongs to a man who didn't just find gold. He found one of the purest nuggets ever discovered, and he wasn't even looking for it. Number 1. Kevin Hillier. In 1980, Kevin Hillier was living in rural Australia. He wasn't a miner or even particularly interested in gold. He was recovering from back surgery, and his doctor had recommended regular walking for exercise. To make the walks more interesting, Kevin and his wife bought cheap metal detectors. They weren't experts. They barely knew how to use the devices. But one afternoon, Kevin stepped into a field near their RV and heard a faint beep. At first, he thought it was a malfunction. He almost ignored it. But something inside told him to take a second look. He knelt down, scraped at the soil, and froze. Beneath the dirt was a massive, gleaming nugget of gold. As his wife approached, she found him trembling, tears in his eyes, staring at what would soon be called the Hand of Faith nugget. It was over 18 inches long, weighing 61 pounds, and, almost unbelievably, 99% pure gold. The nugget was so enormous they didn't know what to do with it. For days, they kept it hidden under their bed, too shocked to believe it was real. Eventually, they auctioned it off, selling it to a Las Vegas casino for $1 million, worth around $4 million today. In the blink of an eye, Kevin and his family went from ordinary life in an RV to instant millionaires, all because he listened to a faint beep and dug a hole. From James Marshall, who sparked the California gold rush but died broke, to Kevin Hillier, who stumbled into millions by accident. These stories show that luck doesn't follow logic. Some chased gold fever their whole lives and lost everything. Others found unimaginable treasure when they weren't even looking. Maybe that's the lesson. Fortune doesn't always reward the hardest worker. Sometimes it chooses the one who happens to be in the right place at the right time, with the right amount of curiosity to bend down and take a closer look. So which of these stories amazed you the most? And if you had to choose, would you risk everything chasing fortune, or would you rather have luck strike when you least expect it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed these incredible tales of fortune and misfortune, subscribe for more forgotten stories that shaped our world. Because sometimes the most amazing history is found in the lives of ordinary people who stumbled into extraordinary moments.